Just about 3 kilometers into the ride and we have our first puncture. Good morning. I'm standing in this little wood because I'm trying to get away from the noise of the traffic, which you may be able to hear behind me, and away from the wind. Talking about the wind, myself and a small group of other Cambridge Cycling Club members are going on a 100-kilometer ride today. However, we're going to cheat a little bit because we're going to ride with a strong tailwind and then catch the train back. However, the main point of this video is to review this Ryet saddle that I have previously done an unboxing and review of, which you can see a link to in the top right hand corner. This is our first and only substantial hill for today. As for the saddle, I've been using it for around 3,000 kilometers and I've done 4 or 5 100-kilometer plus rides. The longest was about 120 kilometers. It's been a bit of a mucky ride and my chain has got very dry. We've just stopped, had a nice cup of coffee and some cake. Right, back to the saddle. Well, I've done 72 kilometers so far and my backside is holding up quite well. Shall we go? Right, I'm just on about 100 kilometers now and one of my cycling companions has had a puncture. I'm not surprised given the state of this road. As for this saddle, I was quite comfortable on it up until about 80 kilometers. After about 80 kilometers I started getting a very small amount of niggles. Now, it wasn't bad at all, I could just ignore it. Now, I'm going to have a generalization here that this saddle is about as comfortable at 80 to 90 kilometers as my full carbon saddle, the one you can see now, is at say 40 kilometers. So doing 100 kilometers on this is not a problem at all. We've now finished our ride. 100 kilometers of tailwind, great. And now we're cheating by taking the train back to Cambridge. That is the headwind section. I've got about 5 or 6 kilometers to get back to my house, so I'm riding into the wind. Out of the wind, that's better. I've just taken this Ryet saddle off my bike in order to inspect it, and I've looked at the carbon underneath using this watchmaker's loop. The base, the rails and the joints look pretty good. This 3D printed honeycomb is looking a little polished, but otherwise there doesn't seem to be any other degradation. One of the things I was concerned about was whether the top surface would peel away from the base. That's because I suspect the adhesive used to bond the two together would be a weak area. However, at the moment I can't see any sign of that happening. The caveat to that is that I've only been using this in relatively cool weather, and I suspect when the temperatures get up, that will put a lot more stress on that adhesive. If you've got any experience of using this saddle in hot weather, can you let me know whether that bond between the honeycomb top surface and the base is a problem? After 3,000 kilometers, structurally and from a durability point of view, this saddle is looking good. And oh my, it does feel light. Firstly, my experience today is consistent with other rides on this saddle. So the conclusions today, I think, are quite generic. The most important thing for me was, did I get to that magic, or maybe not so magic, 100 kilometers? The answer was yes, and I did it without any real discomfort. Okay, there was a small amount of niggling, but to be honest, it's no worse than any other saddle I've used. In fact, considerably better. As for saddle discomfort, I haven't experienced any saddle sores or have any bruising on my rear end. So overall, I think this saddle is doing just what I wanted. So I've determined this Ryet 3D printed saddle is pretty good. After all, it's quite light at 165 gram, pretty cheap at around 40 to 45 pounds, And as I've discovered, it's quite comfortable and covers all of my day-to-day cycling needs. 100 kilometers, maybe even 150 kilometers is quite doable. However, I've got a couple of outstanding issues. First of all, that 3D printed top surface. How will it stand up to high temperatures? Well, only time, that is waiting for the summer, or your comments will give me the answer to that question. Secondly, how does it compare to my favourite saddle, the Brooks C17 that you can see here? As I hadn't ridden the Brooks for a while, I took it out and did 100 kilometers. And my observation is that this Brooks is probably slightly more comfortable than that Ryet saddle. So if I was going to go on a long distance ride, say 200 kilometers or more, or multi-day rides, I'd probably put this Brooks on instead. So this Ryet saddle will be my everyday saddle, but I will be using my Brooks C17 for special occasions like longer rides and tours. Anyway, I hope you found this review useful. If you do, please give it a thumbs up, and if you like this sort of content, consider subscribing. So from me, until the next video, it's goodbye.